Professor Ivan Kachinavsky has written extensively on Ukraine and Russia. He teaches at the School of Political Studies and Conflict Studies and Human Rights program at the University of Ottawa. Thank you so much for joining us once again, Professor Kachinavsky.
Thank you again for the invitation. It was a pleasure to be on your show before.
Thank you. So, you've written extensively about Ukraine. You're from Ukraine. You're now living in Canada. The last time you were on the show, there's a lot of misinformation coming out of the United States, out of Russia, out of Ukraine. You have been pretty vociferous about the false narratives coming out. But let's talk about a report that in March of this year, Ukrainians and Russians negotiated in Istanbul. Now, this is what the Western press is reporting, and I think you've written about this. As I understand it, Ukraine agreed not to join NATO. This is negotiating with Russians in Turkey. They agreed they wouldn't join NATO. They would be allowed, I believe, to join the EU. There would be a promise that Ukraine would remain neutral militarily. Russia and the West would guarantee its security. That was a deal that purportedly was struck at the end of March in Istanbul. How serious was this deal? Was Putin on board? And did Boris Johnson and the United States kill it?
Yes, this was very serious negotiations, which I analyzed extensively at the time when they happened and afterwards. And I recently presented my paper, my study of the Russia-Ukraine war at the annual meeting of American Political Science Association in Montreal, in which I also examined this issue, in particular about negotiations and how they came to the end. And according to various sources, which I originally reported in May, after the first publication in Ukrainian media, in the Ukrainska Pravda newspaper, which is top newspaper in Ukraine, and which is also pro-Western and pro-Zelensky newspaper. And they have close connection to the Zelensky government. One of the journalists, former journalists, became and now is advisor to Zelensky. And they reported then in May that negotiations between Russia and Ukraine were close to making a peace deal, and that this peace deal was ended after the British Prime Minister visited Kyiv in April and told Zelensky basically not to sign such a deal. And in particular, and he said also if Zelensky would sign such a deal, the Western countries would not provide guarantees, security guarantees to Ukraine. And this information was reported later, in particular by publication in Foreign Affairs magazine in the United States, which is, again, one of the top journals. But this article was published by a former national security official, senior national security official in the United States, Fiona Hill, who was also a key witness in Trump impeachment. And she wrote in this article, which she wrote together with another former U.S. government official, and she said that numerous U.S. former senior officials confirmed to her that there was a framework agreed between Ukraine and Russia to basically to reach such a deal in which Ukraine would become neutral country and Russia would withdraw their forces from occupied areas. And the issue was, I think the issue was remaining about status of Donbass. And according to preliminary discussions about this agreement, there was this issue was not yet resolved. And according to article in Ukrainska Pravda, it was supposed to be resolved either during negotiations between Putin and Zelensky, or it would be left basically as status quo to be decided in the future. So there is confirmation from various sources, and just recently also Putin, in his statement, when he announced mobilization of Russian military forces and annexation of regions which are occupied by Russia and separatist-controlled Donbass, he also mentioned this deal, that this was basically a deal which was, he said, broken by the United States and the United Kingdom. So there is various evidence which supports this.
So there was some kind of deal at the end of March where the Donbas region, which just got annexed into the Russian Federation, that was supposed to be negotiated at a future date, as well as Crimea. Would that also be on the table?
This was actually a written proposal by Ukrainian delegation at this peace talks. And
So
yes, so this is what they propose to Russia. Basically, they propose that Ukraine would be neutral country, no NATO membership, and status of Donbass would be decided later, maybe during negotiations with Putin, or maybe would be left as status quo, kind of during what happened at the borders, which were de facto, including the ones which were occupied by Russia. But they also mentioned the status of Crimea would be basically left for 15 years to be decided later. So it would be put out of agreement. And this was proposed by Ukrainian delegation. And according to various sources, Russia basically not accepted this immediately, but they said that this was kind of basically point to discuss, and they were ready to discuss this, and there was possibility of meeting between Putin and Zelensky, according to Ukrainska Pravda sources.
One of the things we've been talking about on this show is, in the end, this is how the war will end, with eastern Ukraine somehow being negotiated. The fighting stops, and Ukraine doesn't join NATO. I didn't think it would ever be allowed by Russia to join the EU, but apparently that was okay with Russia, right?
Yes, it was also in the agreement mentioned specifically that all countries, in Ukrainian proposal, that all countries which provide security guarantees to Ukraine would also provide support for Ukraine joining the European Union. And at the time, Putin said that he did not object to European Union membership of Ukraine. And before this war, also I mentioned in my interviews and publications that one way to resolve this conflict is basically for Ukraine to become a neutral country, to accept some kind of autonomy for Donbass, according to Minsk agreements, and to offer Ukraine real prospect of becoming European Union member. And this was basically what was similar. Proposal was submitted by Ukrainian delegation during these peace talks, and there was real possibility that deal would be reached. But now, I think this is after British Prime Minister basically said that there is no way for Ukraine to to accept.
What is the incentive of Boris Johnson to kill this deal?
I think he was speaking not from himself. Even so, he opposed such a deal because this would mean that Putin would be considered to be achieved some of his goals, because Putin justified this illegal invasion of Ukraine by saying that NATO membership of Ukraine is not acceptable to Russia. So if Ukraine agreed to such agreement with no NATO membership, so this would support kind of justification for Putin's invasion, even so there was no possibility of Ukraine becoming a member of NATO in the near future, but still this would mean that the West would basically consider that Russia achieved by force, by military force, their political goal. In addition to this, I think Johnson was not speaking just on behalf of himself. He was speaking on behalf of the collective West, which he mentioned, which means, I think, United States in particular. And Zelensky just did not say no, because he is very dependent militarily on the West, economically on the West, because the Western countries provided all the military, basically, support for Ukraine, funding even for the government, just paying salaries to the government. And so basically, this is a very large amount of money. And also kind of Ukraine is, since Maidan is also is very dependent on the United States, because U.S. government has very strong influence in Ukrainian politics in nomination of, for instance, prime ministers of Ukraine, in selection of even head of security service or prosecutor general office according to various Ukrainian media reports and tapes which were published. So there is a kind of dependence of Ukraine, and Ukraine is not an equal ally, as often media try to present, of the United States. It's actually, Ukraine is more like a client state of the United States, and this is real politics,
Right.
or geopolitics.
I want to read something you wrote 8 years ago, right around the time after Crimea was taken by Putin. You wrote this in the Washington Post. You had a piece 8 years ago entitled, "What Do Citizens of Ukraine Actually Think About Secession?" Because at the time, there was this report of separatists in the Donbass region, which is now, according to Putin, part of the Russian Federation. This is what you wrote in 2014. "The representation of separatism in Donbass by the Ukrainian and the Western governments and the media as small groups of Russian military intelligence agents and local terrorists or rebels who lack popular backing in this region and therefore can be easily defeated by force is unfounded." You're saying, this is what you wrote, I believe, 8 years ago. You were saying that there was a movement, a legitimate separatist movement in the Donbass region of Russian-speaking Ukrainians who wanted to be part of a Russian federation, and this wasn't being ginned up by Russian military intelligence agents. It is a genuine urge to go back to Russia. Do you still believe that?
Yes, and there's a lot of evidence supporting this, and I wrote my article based on survey research, which I commissioned, or public opinion poll, which I commissioned from Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, which is leading Ukrainian public opinion research company, and they conducted public opinion poll, which showed that there was majority support for various types of separatism and a significant support for joining Russia in Donbass. And I also published my book based on my doctoral dissertation, which I defended in the United States in 2001, in which I analyzed all the election results, all public opinion polls. And in my book and in my dissertation, PhD dissertation, I noticed, I compared Ukraine to Moldova, neighboring Moldova, which had similar separatist problem and de facto secession of one of the region. And I predicted that Ukraine can have similar outcome to what happened in Moldova. And I mentioned specifically Crimea and Donbass as two regions in which there was very significant support for separatism if a political situation would change. And this is what happened. Crimea was annexed by Russia, but there was very strong support for joining Russia, according to public opinion polls.
So in your piece, you said it was at about 52%, as I remember.
Yes, I think 56 or total of something.
So it's not, so what does that mean? It means that half of the Donbass region wanted to be absorbed into Russia and the other half didn't?
No, it meant the population, about a slight majority of population wanted to support at the time various kind of separatism, ranging from autonomy within Ukraine, which was still official goal of separatist government at the time in Donbass, or to join in Russia, or to become an independent state.
So if I'm hearing you properly, a little more than half, not a big majority, of people living in the Donbass wanted to secede from Ukraine and either become an independent nation or be absorbed into Russia. Is that?
This is also important to say, or to remain autonomous region, or to become an autonomous region within Ukraine. So this
like part of a federation.
Yes, basically as part of federal Ukraine.
As part of Ukraine. So
yes.
You know more than I do, but it doesn't sound like it's an overwhelming desire to be absorbed by Putin.
Yes, this is the case. And
am I right in saying? Am I right? Am I right in saying that your polling back in 2014 didn't indicate that there was an overwhelming yearning to be brought back into Mother Russia?
Yes, at the time there was a real possibility of resolving this conflict by giving Donbass autonomy, and this is what I also advocated at the time. But if the choice is between yes or no, basically, if becoming independent or not independent, then this would mean that a lot of people who supported autonomy of Ukraine, which was the official goal of Donbass separatists at the time, would they switch and start joining and start supporting Russia. And there were some public opinion polls conducted by German sociological company, German Research Institute, and they found that in recent years there was majority support for joining Russia in a separatist-controlled part of Donbass.
What percentage of the Donbass is Russian-speaking?
I think this is like overwhelmingly they speak Russian, so maybe like 95% or more than 90% they are Russian-speaking. Even so, ethnic Russian population is only about close to 50% in Donbass.
I see.
So that's why this two regions, Crimea, there was majority ethnically Russian population, and in Donbass it was close to half. But in other regions, which I examined, like Kherson or Zaporizhia, which are now occupied by Russia and annexed by Russia, there was very small support for joining Russia at the time, and this is the case still. So just few percent wanted to join Russia, and they are Russian-speaking population, but they are Ukrainians.
Right.
That's why they do not want to join Russia, because they are still Ukrainians, even though they speak Russian.
Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe. America has been eyeing it for its natural resources. It's a market that this country has wanted to tap. No question. The Maidan, the Yanukovych, was he violently overthrown by America?
I think it's much to say. It's based on my research. He was violently overthrown by elements of the Maidan opposition, including oligarchic elements of mainstream political parties and also elements of far-right opposition, which organized a Maidan massacre of police and protesters and basically overthrew.
Was this something Hillary and the Obama administration helped orchestrate, do you think? Something we wanted?
There is no evidence of direct U.S. involvement in Maidan massacre, but there was a testimony or interviews with two leaders of the Maidan at the time from the far-right party, which was called Svoboda. And they wrote in a book, their interviews were published in a book, which was published by Ukrainian journalists and pro-Maidan. And they said that before Maidan massacre, a few weeks before the Maidan massacre, they and other Maidan leaders met with a representative from the West. And the representative from the West told them that it's not sufficient that few people are killed during Maidan protests at the time, but that Western support for Yanukovych government would change, and the recognition of Yanukovych government would change only if the number of killed protesters would be 100. So they basically kind of talk about number, which would be sufficient for number of to earn recognition of the Yanukovych government by the West. And this is what happened after the Maidan massacre. Right after the Maidan massacre, there was a declaration by the Maidan leadership that there was kind of 100 protesters killed, and they called this heavenly 100. Even so, this was not yet 100 protesters. So they included some people who were not even on Maidan specifically to publicize this 100. And there was admission by Obama in CNN interview in which he said that he helped to organize a transition of power in Ukraine during the Maidan before Yanukovych fled from Kyiv and from Ukraine. And also in his memoirs, Biden said that he called Yanukovych right after the Maidan massacre and told him to leave, basically, not only from presidency of Ukraine, but also from Ukraine. And this was kind of what was basically what happened. And this led to a change of the government. And this is, I think, what kind of U.S. involvement is information is available right now.
You're from Ukraine. from what I've read, there are 15 million people who've been forced to leave their homes. The UN used to say there were 6 million refugees forced to leave Ukraine. We were looking at a map. It's way more than 6 million Ukrainians who've left Ukraine, been forced to leave Ukraine. If America stayed out of this, if America just let Ukraine alone, what would Russia's relationship be with Ukraine right now?
I think it's very difficult to say because this is like real world, and I deal with real world and politics. So I think if US would not be involved, so basically Ukraine would be more likely a client state of Russia, similar to what is currently with Belarus, basically. And Russia would be kind of influential in Ukrainian politics, similar to what is currently a role of the United States. And according to, I think, data from Ukrainian statistics, there are a lot of people who left Ukraine, but many of them also returned back from European Union countries because the war is no longer taking place in their regions of Ukraine, in particular in Kyiv region or Kharkiv region. So a lot of people returned to Ukraine. But I think because Ukraine is, I think, in a very tragic situation because it's now became a center of fight, basically, or struggle between two nuclear powers.
Right.
Russia, which invaded Ukraine, and the United States, which wanted to use Ukraine, again, to weaken Russia. And basically, this is now not only war between Russia and Ukraine, which is, again, very damaging to Ukraine, and I think would likely to continue without any prospect of real peace because of Russian annexation of this region, but also this is also because of a proxy war between the West and Russia in Ukraine, and this is another dimension which is also very important.
Before you go, what is in the Donbass that Putin wants other than people who identify with Mother Russia? What are the minerals? What is it? Coal? Is it energy? Is it rare earth? What rare minerals? What does Putin want from the Donbass?
Donbass is basically an industrial heartland of Ukraine. It is a very industrial region built at the time of the Soviet Union, including in particular kind of heavy steel kind of production and metal production, like industry steel mills and so on, and coal. So this is, again, a very important industrial center of Ukraine. In addition to this, Donbass, in particular southern Donbass, along with the Zaporizhia region and Kherson region, would provide Russia a direct connection to Crimea, which was annexed by Russia over land. And this is another reason why Russia basically annexed Donbass along with Kherson and Zaporizhia regions of Ukraine.
Fantastic. Professor Ivan Kachanovsky has written extensively on Ukraine and Russia. He teaches at the School of Political Studies and Conflict Studies and Human Rights program at the University of Ottawa in Canada, where he joined us today. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. How do people follow you on Twitter?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. How do people follow you on Twitter, Professor?
Yes, they can follow on Twitter. This is my last name, first name I, and last name Kachanovsky, which may be difficult to spell, but they can use my name or just search for.
Yes.
For
I'll put a link to your Twitter account in the description of this show. Thank you so much for coming on. Please come back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You're listening to The David Feldman Show, office hours, Friday night at 8 p.m. We'll continue discussing this. We'll be back with Royal Watcher Sir Arthur Grebe Streebling. But first...